Payton. Thanks so much for joining me today. Today, we're going to not only dive into the cannabis industry, but you seem to have a very strong focus on operational excellence and team development. I think from our last call, I was very interested in seeing how your management and leadership style is. Just in the first 5 minutes, you laid it all out very well on exactly what you focus on in a leadership role and how you go about, I guess, managing the various things on your team. I'd love to know a little bit more about your management style, and we're going to be talking about a lot of that today, including some of the challenges that me and you both know that you faced when you were opening up your store. That's quite the interesting story. But thank you so much for joining me today, Payton.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Really looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a great one. I think you started your journey at Mass Mutual, like you said, right? And you were there before. What inspired you to hop into the cannabis industry of all industries from Mass Mutual?
Yeah, great question. So in full transparency, I knew cannabis was very much alive and well in the city of Springfield as a virtue of being born and raised here. So as a result of knowing that cannabis was alive and well in the city of Springfield and having classmates that had used cannabis, I knew that once the voters voted to legalize, that there was going to be interest here in the city of Springfield. Concurrently, not only was I working at Mass Mutual, but I was interning with the Springfield City Council, one city councilor in particular. And I had a front row seat to watching the city of Springfield grapple with the reality of both zoning while also trying to figure out who would be allowed to have licensure and ultimately what it would look like. During that process, I met many multi-state operators that had come to the city of Springfield and referred to it more as a profit center than that of a community with people. And it was a very conflicting time because I was hearing legislators talk about cannabis as a way to generate jobs and income in communities of disproportionate impact, and Springfield was designated one. And yet I was hearing business people talk about it more so as a profit center, with no real gusto to hire people outside of the roles of inventory specialist or bud tender. And so I really fell into the industry wanting to have within the city of Springfield an authentic option for folks to shop with and feel good about procuring cannabis, but also at the same time employing people from the city of Springfield, being engaged in the community, and ultimately providing much needed education. Because within the community, there was definitely mixed emotions. And that piece became really a catalyst for the success we've since received.
Got it. So when you say mixed emotions, is that something similar to Principal Worthy? And just on a personal side, right? What do you mean by mixed emotions?
Yeah, great question. So relative to the mixed emotions, I very early on was called a drug dealer and told that I was going to ruin the youth of Springfield and allow people access to a gateway drug. And so I was really acknowledging, because of the harm the war on drugs had done in the city of Springfield, that many folks did not see any benefits to this industry coming to Springfield. And if anything, they found it very odd that I, as a woman of color, a Black woman in particular, would be willing to jump in this industry when also acknowledging, looking at historical police data, that there were numerous Black and brown people who went to jail for the very same plant. And so it was a mixture of emotions of people wanting to be protective, finding this to be a taboo industry, not one that would look good on my resume, while also culturally really pushing back against an industry that had harmed so many people in the same community I was looking to open a storefront.
So it sounds like it's a pretty much like an oxymoron, right? Where I don't know if you watched the interview with Musk, where he's building SpaceX, and he's been looking up to Neil and Buzz Aldrin and all these heroes for so long, and there is the interviewer brings up a clip, and it's basically Buzz Aldrin absolutely just dumping on the guy. And it's like, how, how does he think, who does he think he is? A
Yeah.
civilian now, talking about the space program. And this is, Buzz Aldrin, like his hero, right?
Yeah.
And he's just shitting on the guy. And it's such a hard thing, right? Where it's like, I feel, at least with me, the naysayers are really close by,
Oh, yes.
right? And often they're within your own family, your own network. How do you navigate that perception, and what keeps you motivated when you've had, like, you know important people that you kind of look up to in life, and they have a certain perception, whether that's societal pressure or just the prohibition, right? Whatever has done the damage. How do you still keep going and um, change that perception?
Yeah. Honestly speaking, the resistance was as close as it can get relative to my father, just very much struggling with the reality that his daughter, who's supposed to go to law school, is now talking about becoming a legal drug dealer. And so it was really finding an even footing for the both of us as to what I was trying to achieve and him grappling with the reality of his lived experience. My parents did not grow up here. They grew up in Westchester County, New York. And so my dad grew up in the 80s, seeing the war on drugs play out in real time, where I didn't have that visibility to understand the impact that cannabis had had to him very early on in his life. And so to have a full circle moment where you view cannabis as a negative, I grew up in a dry household. So, I mean, let's talk about it, right? No cannabis, no even liquor. And now all of a sudden, I'm going to pull our entire family into this industry. The resistance was there from day one. Over time, he's been my biggest advocate and fan. I mean, he's gone on more Grove tours and seen more dispensaries than even I. But part of that was really finding what was I trying to achieve? And then how could I communicate it to those that could buy into that mission and vision, regardless of it being cannabis, right? Cannabis was going to happen here in the city of Springfield, whether I opened Six Bricks or not. And once I got people to understand that piece, then there was a willingness to say, well, at least she's a part of the community. At least we can call her. At least we can have a conversation. But one of the most important things I did to create that buy-in once I had it with my family was going to neighborhood council meetings and understanding what were people truly concerned about and having an empathetic approach, which I think has done me extremely well as I think about where I currently stand, right? I made myself a student to the communities that were pushing back the most. And as a result of that, I was able to address their concerns in a way that both empowered us both in the conversation to feel both seen and heard, while concurrently addressing them in my business model. So that way, when we talk about Six Bricks, a community dispensary, that's not clever verbiage. That's a testament to what we've done from day one.
That is very interesting. So you said a lot of things, but they all revolved around, I think, one word that can describe you well, which is a leader. You mentioned buy-in, you mentioned empathy, you mentioned getting everybody kind of ready to go behind you on your plan. What is your earliest memory of wanting to be a leader?
Oh, that's a good question. If I really put my thinking cap on, it would probably be, oh, this is going to sound crazy out loud. It would probably be elementary school. I had a
Okay.
teacher, Miss Logan, and I recall that she didn't feel we were ready to write multi-page long essays. And I was very much of the mindset that we could. In my mind, it wasn't that big of a deal. And so, some way, somehow, in the course of our class, she had challenged me to a 6-page essay. Ironically, six, right? Six bricks. And it was Friday. And I said, okay, I can do it. She was like, well, if you do it and come into class on Monday with it and submit it to me, I will allow everyone in the room to have a double recess. So instead of 30 minutes, it would have been 60
Wow.
minutes.
Wow. Okay.
And I went to a Catholic school, so Our Lady of Hope, and the idea of double recess was almost like a myth. We didn't think it existed at that point in time. And I remember for me at that moment wanting to lead by example of writing this essay because I knew I could do it. But more so, I wanted to lead in service of others because it'd be great if I got double recess. But if we all could get double recess, that means some of our favorite games didn't have to end prematurely. And when I think back to that moment, it really was leadership, but more so rooted in service of others. If I can do this, I can show others it's possible, which is a benefit. But then we all can actually enjoy more time together. And I think we were going to end up skipping a class that wasn't a favorite subject anyway, right? So there was three clear ways that this was going to benefit me. And that was my first real memory of leadership, right? The idea that I was kind of put on the spot to see if I could achieve this thing and took the challenge, but then also created the example where I remember handing it in on that Monday. Like 4 other students were like, we'll want to write essays too, right? Like we wanted this system of double
Same
recess.
thing, right?
So yeah, that's my first memory.
Wow. Okay. Do you feel the attitude that you had when you were young, like that essay is very much so possible. It's doable. Do you feel that attitude served you when you were opening up your cannabis business, or did that stay?
Oh, most certainly. I think there's a consistent theme throughout my life of a few things. The first is my parents were very honest with me, in particular my dad. And so it created a sense of possibilities, but also with the emotional maturity that if someone tells you that you can't do something, it's because they themselves may not be capable. It's not a reflection of your skills or ability. And having that messaging early on definitely created a dynamic where I can be the first to admit I was probably a handful for certain teachers because I would question them with the intent of understanding. Do they actually know what they're talking about? Are they being honest? Can I believe what they're telling me? Because I had such a sense of confidence in my skills and
Mm.
abilities, which my parents really poured into me. And I think over time it created a dynamic where I was very comfortable receiving a no because it just meant that that wasn't the right opportunity for me, but it wasn't a reflection of my skills or ability. And so it definitely served me well in cannabis. I mean, think about finding your initial funding and you get a lot more no's than you get yeses, and yet you still keep going out there and asking. And so being very confident in who I was as a person, understand what I was trying to achieve, those lessons early on have definitely stuck with me and have created the dynamic now where even as people share with me their comments, questions, or concerns, always taking it with a grain of salt, acknowledging it may reflect more of their thought process than what I'm actually capable of.
Got it. So I guess this is more of a psychological or philosophical question. Leaders, how much do our parents have to do with um, whether, yeah, are leaders born or are they made?
Ooh, good question. I would say it's a yes and, right? I do feel that leaders are born. I'm the oldest of 4 children, and so in many respects, I joke, right? I was the guinea pig in the family because my parents and I experienced many firsts together in terms of being the first kid to get dropped off at kindergarten, being the first one to go to college, and having that relationship of, hey, we're both going to figure it out together because you don't know what this looks like and neither do I. So I think that's part of it in terms of my situation. I also know firstborns who are like, yeah, no, I'm not figuring out anything. Like that's for the secondborn. On the same time, I do think that leaders are made when they have clarity about who they are and what they're trying to achieve in this world. And I think that there is something inherently important about the dynamic of understanding who am I, what skills do I have, and how can I be of service to others with that? And unfortunately, I do think that in our current society, this notion of being in service of others is not discussed more broadly. And so we do see more so of a mindset that leaders are born versus made because we're not taking the time to nourish and mold one another in a way that would allow for more leaders to be made over time, because we prefer the preset models of checking a box and fitting in, when in reality, we're all meant to stand out in our own unique way.
So standing out, I mean, obviously, in one thing that I've noticed in the cannabis industry as I've come here is everybody's coming from a pretty corporatized, rigid structure. And that corporatized, rigid structure is completely, what's the lack of a better word to put it? It's completely self-serving, right? It doesn't do anything for the people that are working within it. It's completely self-serving. And how do you go about, let's say, managing or developing authenticity along with just figuring out who you are as a business owner while operating against the corporatized structure, right? And and on the field. How does a small business owner like yourself develop these, I guess, core skills to where you don't conform, but you dig in, double down, and show your authenticity?
Yeah. I think it really comes down to knowing what you're good at, right? What are your strengths? And then also being comfortable in identifying your weaknesses, and then building a team that is well-rounded. I think oftentimes those corporatized structures have a model that works. And then you see folks emulate that. I mean, I still remember when dispensaries were coming online, everybody wanted to look like the Apple store that sold cannabis, right? And that was the model that folks felt they had to follow in order to be successful. And the problem with that is it didn't allow for the uniqueness of each company to say, what am I going to be good at, right? What am I not going to be good at? And how do I build a team around that so that what I present to customers or patients is authentic to who I am and what I'm capable of? And I think, again, that much of my upbringing informed me that I don't need to compare myself to others. Comparison's the thief of joy. So instead, a lot of my focus was, what am I going to be good at? And what can I bring to the industry that no one else can? And that's where the operational excellence really came in, building a strong team and really thinking about the things that I felt confident that I could execute on and focusing on that, right? The whole notion of wanting to fit into a corporate structure for me was out the window early on because I didn't have corporate dollars, right? Like, you can't match what you can't afford. And if you do try, right, it's the old adage, choose your hard, right? Being disciplined with your money's hard, but so is not having a lot of money, right? Because you're constantly in that state of debt and poverty. So with that in mind, I was just very clear that I needed to be able to do something that felt not only that it was authentic to who I was, but ultimately what I was creating. And going back to community, I wanted people to feel good about shopping with us. And I didn't want them to feel like it was this corporatized thing that they didn't see themselves in, but instead reminiscent of what I knew was going to still be in place, a legacy market, but create a model of education for the many naysayers who were uncomfortable with cannabis coming together. And that was the focus, right? I never wanted to be someone or something I knew I couldn't afford to be or didn't feel was authentic to the community. And so I never got caught in that game.
Yeah. No, I think that's incredibly important. You said a couple of quotes where I think I'm gonna have to make like a giant T-shirt. I forget the exact one. I'm gonna have to check the recording. But when you said it, the whole sentence was wordsmithed so beautifully. I was like, man, that's a great quote. When you lead your team, right? You say a lot about leading your team, and essentially having almost like a strengths and weaknesses, like a SWOT analysis for yourself, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Talk to me about your process. How do you go about triaging, right? Who you're going to find? How do you formulate your team, and how do you go about executing, right? Your mission, and also if you can talk a little bit about your buy-in process, because it's, again, from your construction to the inception of the project to even your family. It sounds like you have a very strong buy-in process. And I would love to know what that funnel looks like. So, yeah, tell me more.
Yeah, I think it's threefold relative to the first piece is you really have to know who you are, what you're good at, and what you're not good at in order to build a team of people around you. And I think, unfortunately, what I've seen in industry, even in hiring folks, and unfortunately having to dismiss them as well, that people will hyper focus on what they're not good at, and almost as if it's a badge that they have to disclose they have prior to being able to understand that you're only as good as your weakest link when it comes to a team, right? And so if I know what I'm weak at and I can hire and have a counterpart that's strong in that, then I'm making a better team as I evolve it over time. And so, as selfish as it may sound, I really wanted to make sure that I knew what I was going to be great at, what I wasn't going to be great at, and then find the right people that were going to be able to pick up where I couldn't execute well. And understanding that I didn't want to just hire anyone, especially for my leadership team, but those who really saw cannabis the way I did relative to, I mean, we're a dispensary, but we have a mission and vision, right? And that was a game changer for certain people who said, this feels different just because I've never seen a group talk about what they were going to do on a reoccurring basis and keep it top of mind. I mean, for us, it's simple. We want to connect our customers with the best products for them, right? And so thinking about that was understanding, well, are you education focused, right? Because if you're not focused on connecting people with the best product for them. You're just worried about what SKUs you're going to move and how quickly you can move them without thinking through the nuances of education and so on and so forth. And I think that's where the buy-in started, because even our interview questions and our engagement was different, right? I didn't need to know if you were familiar with Dutchie. I needed to know what customer service skills you had and what importance you placed on it as I thought about the model that we would create. And I think the buy-in came because I was unwavering in my commitment to what I wanted to execute on. And if someone didn't fit that model, it was not a reflection of them. It just meant that it probably wasn't going to work out and we need to move in a different direction. And I think the team seeing that consistently created the dynamic where folks really started to buy into this idea that we're going to create something different together, but they had to be an active participant in what that looked like.
While you're doing all of that and leading your team and developing it, how do you balance compassion with also accountability? I remember you telling me about an individual last time who was late, and you said something to the effect of, I'm not mad at you. This is just the action that was committed, right? Which was not in alignment with the company values, is what I'm commenting on, not you as the person. I think that's a very, it takes quite a secure person, and quite a secure leader to really and intimately know yourself, separate out all those feelings. Very similar to the movie If. It's I watched it with my nieces and nephews when the first one came out.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the second one, but I think that is like a stable human being, and even more so, I think somebody being in a leadership position, that's very important to know all of your emotions.
Oh, yeah. I agree
Yeah.
wholeheartedly. I mean, at the end of the day, I do feel that part of my success has been really intimately connected to the emotional maturity I can bring to situations. So with the example you outlined, I mean, at the end of the day, I did create systems and structures that created a 6 brick standard, not a Payton standard, right? Because at the end of the day, and the team hates when I say, if I get hit by a bus or win the lottery or what have you, and I'm no longer showing up every day, how does this place function without Payton Shubrick? And it's because it can't be dependent on my emotional state It has to be dependent on what we as a leadership team and I as CEO have set as our standards and expectations and the systems that we work. I think oftentimes in cannabis, especially acknowledging we're still in the infancy of building out what will be a robust industry, right? That becomes federally legal and so many other things. There's a lot of emotion. And so I regularly ask the team, are we acting from fact or feeling, right? If you've seen Inside Out 2, it's very easy to allow anxiety to hit the control panel and create negative scenario after negative scenario. But what's worse is then operate from that as though it's fact when it's just your feelings. And so helping folks to understand, I will not be mad at you because something you did, but I'm going to hold you accountable because we have a standard that you didn't meet. And so as just as much as I want you to hold me accountable if I don't meet that standard, I'm going to hold you accountable and we're going to get better together, right? It doesn't place me above you. It means we're working alongside, but that means at any point in time, if you're not meeting the role the way that you need to, we gotta have to have a conversation. At the same time, I need that feedback if I'm not hitting the role the way I need to. So that again, there is this iterative process of agility that we baked into our culture to really make sure that at the end of the day, you're not walking across the parking lot mumbling under your breath, angry with someone, but instead we're thinking, what needs to change in our systems and our structure and our standards in order to keep us progressing in the right direction?
In the beginning, when I first got started, it's like a giant roller coaster of learning, just to manage people, right? And one of the biggest mistakes that I made in the beginning was the conversations that I should have been having with my actual front of house team. I was having with my HR admin, in order to pass it along. I was really far removed, or not really far removed, but I was still one layer removed. And I've learned now that there should be absolutely no layers. And for it to be adequately successful and how you would actually like it, you need 0 layers. Talk to me about what is your company and your team hierarchy. How does I guess an idea to an execution of a project, how does it play out?
Yeah, great question. So I set the tone with the team relative to we have our strategic priorities and goals for the year. And then everyone is responsible per their department for essentially aligning to the work that they're going to do on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis, aligning to that holistically. And so for us, the structure is myself as CEO, then I have a leadership team. Underneath the leadership team is team leads. So we don't have a traditional general manager model, which allows us to distribute the work, but then also be highly collaborative in how we come to conclusions. The team and I have huddles twice a week, which allows us to have conversation about what's working, what's not working, and again, reminding ourselves of our goals. We have goals per month as well related to net sales and many other aspects. So constantly we're having conversations and dedicated spaces and places to understand how we're doing, what needs to change, what needs to evolve, what's working, what's not, what new dispensary opened down the road, and how do we need to think about that and respond? Does it alter what we've originally outlined for ourselves? So it's a combination of being both proactive and reactive that I think really adds to our success holistically. But in terms of our structure, it's also understanding how do you allow the team to engage with you? And you talk about the layers, right? So I tell the team constantly, if you see something, say something. Yes, I'm setting the tone and direction, but if you see something that's going to hit us like a slow car crash, my expectation is that you point it out, right? And so having healthy methods of communication from group chats to emails, how do you engage based on the level of severity? So that way folks are comfortable, but then also ensuring you're not creating single point of dependencies. So to your example, right, it may make sense for HR to have the awareness of everything going on, on, but then also who else knows, so that if something happens to your HR person and they're out for 3 weeks, things don't stop. And so the team is very intentional in thinking about how, again, do we reflect on the systems that need to be in place to ensure that we can continue to operate at the level I expect them all to, while concurrently being able to pivot and collaborate as needed based on the things out of our control, right? You can only control your controllables. And so, yeah, you can't control the guy who shows up, who wants to buy 3 ounces and is yelling and screaming on the floor because he realizes there's a daily allotment and he can only procure 1. So yeah, it's definitely not something that happens overnight, but I think if you're consistent and clear, right, and create a cadence, the team definitely responds to that in a way that allows you to operate more as a well-oiled machine versus the start and stop that I think some teams are plagued with, because there's not that clarity from the start of what we're trying to accomplish.
Right. What does the word, or what does failure mean to you, and how do you handle it?
Ooh, fail fast. And
Fail
then
fast.
let's discuss lessons learned. I mean, in my mind, failure really equates to a lesson. And so it doesn't help if I'm to hinder my team's creativity with the fear of failure. Instead, I want to promote it within reason, right? Like, don't fail and spend $100,000 in the process, right? But fail and spend $100 in the process, and let's talk about what you've learned, right? So I think there's guardrails you obviously have to put in place, but it is more of an art than a science, because you have to think about how you messaging that allows the team to truly respond in a way that is, 1, authentic to them, but then also 2, allows some sort of creativity. I mean, let's be honest, being in the industry can be tiring and burnout is real. And so if you are creating a dynamic where your team is more afraid of making the wrong decision than carefully curious to explore what could be the best decision, you're not in an organization that's going to grow over time, because people are afraid to.
Right. I have one more thing to add. So fail fast, and then I always say fail cheap.
You and I can align on that one.
Fail fast and fail cheap. Yeah, no, I think especially in the cannabis industry, like there's corporate America, right? Failure is often met with like, see ya,
Yep.
sayonara. And I had to go through my entire protocol of like brainwashing everybody that came from corporate America and these big MSO companies, where I was like, guys, you are part of a company where we are making a 1-year, 3-year, and a 5-year plan together. Not not where your ideas are going to be scrutinized or criticized.
Yep.
But how do you guide your team through the mistakes while still pushing them forward? I find that to be one of the hardest things to, because it's like, yourself, the limitations, and the capacities that you have, but imparting that on other people and helping them peel back the layers, almost like we're doing cognitive behavior therapy on them and trying to peel back all the layers and trying to get them to move along. How do you go about guiding your team?
Yeah, I think it starts with trust. Does your team trust you, and do you trust your team? But trust and empathy at the same time. So very early on, meeting with the team, I structured one-on-ones that happen bi-weekly. And it was understanding in that first one-on-one, what are your preferences? How do you like criticism? How do you like praise? What are you comfortable with? What is your cannabis preferences relative to, we got to do some R&D, right? And really setting the stage to say, yes, I'm the leader, but I need to know what works well for you, so that as I lead, I can then pull you in when it aligns to your strengths, right? And so understanding that certain team members prefer to get feedback in public with other key stakeholders, so that way they don't have to play the game of telephone and communicate to their team what else went wrong. That's helpful for me to know and understand. Where others prefer in a private setting, but they want it timely. They don't want me to wait till they're one-on-one. So it's setting up a 15-minute meeting to have a conversation and not making it scary, right? Here's what we need to discuss. This promo and campaign did not go well. And I want to understand from your perspective what we could have done better and what support you might have needed. And so being able to open the door to say, yeah, we're going to make some mistakes, myself included, but we're going to have a healthy conversation to follow so that we can get better. Again, focusing not on the problem, but on the solution, I think has created a real sense of, I want to say comfort, because we also talk about get comfortable being uncomfortable. I think the industry by default is uncomfortable when you think about the many issues. But instead understanding that, again, it goes back to the emotional intelligence of Payton's not going to be upset with me, but instead I didn't meet the standard and she's going to be pushing me to get back to that standard and perhaps exceed it. And so what do I need to do in order to get myself there? But a lot of it's healthy conversation. And to your point, it's peeling back the onion to get people really uncomfortable so that way they can become a better team member, execute better on an initiative, but always looking for the bright side of it. I do feel that overall, and it's a symptom of being in industry, right? We talk a lot about our problems, right? The Cannabis Control Commission's not doing enough, accounts payable is an issue. And that breeds down to your team, who then gets comfortable talking about the problem a lot. And so it's, hey, yeah, we know the problem. What's the possible solutions? Let's whiteboard and talk about that. And setting up very clear timelines around that, right? So 30-minute meeting, we'll talk about the problem for 5 to 10 minutes at best. Everything else is solution oriented and sticking to that. I don't know how many calls I joined where we burn through at least half of the meeting where everybody's just like venting. And it's like, that's great, but that doesn't produce productivity in a meaningful way.
Right. The venting should be another call all by itself, and then recorded, distilled, and be like, all right, we're talking about that.
Yeah, and after 6 p.m., like not during hours of operation for those who have a 9 to 5.
Yeah. So, well, I guess we can dive right into it. I think this is intertwining with it. But on the last call, you said something about professionalism, and you said how the cannabis industry gets professionalism. Probably like if there was a percentage, like on a scale of 1 to 100, where do you think we are at in the status quo that it should be versus, what the industry is operating at right now?
I would probably, and this is going to be generous, I would say we're probably at about a 25.
25% professionalism.
Yes, most certainly. And here's why, right? I think that coming from financial services, a company with 100+ year legacy, there were very clear expectations around how you would interact and engage with one another. I mean, to put it in perspective, when I started with the company, we couldn't wear jeans. So I was dressing up every single day, right? And that ingrained in me a culture of presentation mattered, words matter, engaging with your colleagues mattered, so on and so forth. What I see in industry is we have roles, but we haven't professionalized them where people have the pride, where I knew I needed to iron my slacks and iron my blouse in a way that when I presented to the world, I was proud for the company to create spaces for me or send me to conferences and so on and so forth. When I think about cannabis, right, there is a very clear notion of it being a job more so than a career. And I think we see that with people not investing in their staff to professionalize them, helping them from a career growth perspective with the bare basics of development plans, let alone attending conferences so that they can get a better understanding of more so the macro level of cannabis, whether that be at the state or the country's level. But then also it's in the behaviors, right? The idea that you can owe a company money and instead of having a conversation, you ghost them, that's problematic. That's not professional, right? You have to own the reality of what you could or couldn't execute on. And our inability to do that's problematic. But it's also stemming from the reality, and this is all levels, right? It's not just small independent groups. There's also larger multi-state operators that don't have the professional courtesies of responding to an email or not giving someone a nickname they didn't ask for, and so on and so forth, right? And so you see a very clear difference, and people who come to the industry with a business acumen, right? They came from another industry, very corporate and structured. And then you have the culture, which is cannabis, with folks coming out of the legacy market or those who are just figuring it out. But we haven't created as an industry a structure that allows people to evolve and grow, nor do I think our day-to-day reflects the professionalism we should have. But remember my earlier comment, right? If we look at the CCC, not the best example, and they're supposed to be our leaders. And so there's a very real trickle down to say, if I can be passive aggressive in a CCC meeting, than me being passive aggressive with my colleagues, right? I'm not that far-fetched, right? So I think a lot of it is really realigning as an industry to say we could be doing better, but what is it going to take for us to get there? And there's some hard truths baked into that, because unfortunately what that does mean is that not everybody is going to have a viable business at the end of the day. If we start to have the conversations and remove what was a professional courtesy and realize it's just an abusive system of a group taking in product they're never going to pay for, or staff that is not actually developing because they're not getting proper training too. So there's many nuances to it that really showcase to me a lack of professionalism that I think ultimately has to be addressed in one capacity or another for us to really get to a space of an equitable, vibrant industry. And unfortunately, we're not there right now.
What do you think is the solution, or what's step 1, 2, and 3, right? In order to get that 25 to, let's say, I don't know, C's get degrees, right? How do you get it to 70?
C's to get degrees. I would say, one, we really have to be honest in terms of what we need out of leaders within the CCC to put us in a direction of progressing forward. I think it's been more than disappointing that Shannon O'Brien was suspended for 11 months, right? The inaction of having someone that's actually the chair and progressing us forward is extremely problematic. I think, two, it's really having companies that are committed to empowering their employees to get better. And so, yes, I understand that badging is expensive, but so is hiring someone because you couldn't retain talent by investing in them, the skill sets that they need to be successful, or hyper focusing on their weaknesses so that you don't have to pay them what they're actually worth. And so that becomes problematic over time. And the last piece, I think, is really more people getting comfortable leading by example. You got to have the tough conversations. It's actually funny, at Mass Mutual, one of the books that I read was Crucial Conversations, right? Having a conversation that is going to be fundamentally uncomfortable from the start because you're giving someone feedback to say they're not doing something right. They're not good at it. It's problematic. And so there's a lot that we all could be doing to get us there. But I would say we're definitely not getting a degree because we're nowhere close to a C in its current format. But that gives us an understanding of the work that we need to do to get there.
Got it. This reminds me of a instance of and I think I've observed this, and I've also heard about this, where in order for complete transformation, you were talking about creating a space, how you used to iron your pants, you used to dress up, but that was you stepping into an entirely different identity, right?
Mhm.
So, from who you were, stepping into a role where, that's from the clothes to your demeanor to how you communicate to how you show up, everything was a new identity that you were stepping into. And I feel like you're really right with the cannabis industry, where we don't know ourselves. We don't know the identity that we are stepping into, right? And it makes it incredibly challenging, because if you don't know the identity, you can't embody like all the positive traits and really take owners of it. And the example that comes to mind is there were these two little girls at a mall in Sephora, and they were like trying out makeup, trying out little things, and the sales rep on the back counter was at the end. He's like, "Well, listen here, girls, you guys are becoming women now. As you guys are growing up, you need to start budgeting for these things. You need to make sure that, you have this, you have this, you have this." And she laid out like clear guidelines, it's like, this is part of being a woman. And a little part of me died, but a little part of me was like, wow, that's really laying it in, setting the groundwork and the framework for everything. And I was like, man, imagine if we did, if we did that during the recruitment process or whatever we were onboarding, like, and what would we say that would set the groundwork, right? To where it would be more of a transformational conversation instead of a transactional one. And
Oh, absolutely. And if I could add to that, because I think identity was perhaps part of it in terms of what I was trying to showcase to the rest of the world. But I think what was more important is I understood the system I was operating in, right? I knew what success looked like, and I knew that I could emulate it in some capacities. I think the hard part for cannabis right now is we don't know what success looks like. And we don't know what good looks like because we haven't taken time to answer the hard identity questions. And so it becomes a game of trying to copy and paste what seems to be working in the moment versus being true to what we need to do in order to progress forward. I mean, we hear the stories of people switching labs because you need the higher testing. You hear of folks that are changing vendors or changing their grow methods to try and get a different result versus taking the time to say, how does my team feel about us being successful, and taking time to unearth maybe the hidden gems of what they would suggest could get you there, right? And that becomes the hard part. Regardless of if I was wearing jeans, a dress, or slacks with a blouse, I knew how to engage with Mass Mutual because I had solid examples of leaders that were engaging and getting 200 plus people to follow them as a department head, which is a tough job to do. And the way in which they showed up created the framework. I think the hard part is we often make this debate of, small business versus MSOs. It's really not about the size of the company. It's the leaders within the company. And I think if we switch to focus on who are leaders that we can learn from in industry, who are leaders that are creating the right company cultures, right? Now we can set up a system or a framework, right? Just to the example of like, here's the multi-step process of buying lipstick and stepping into womanhood. Here's the multi-step process of creating a career out of cannabis and being a leader like an Elon Musk or a Steve Jobs, or fill in the gap for whatever idolized individual society has nominated at the point in time. We haven't done that as an industry yet. And as a result of that, I think that's where the lack of professionalism comes in, because who are people idolizing in cannabis? That's a solid example of knowing themselves and operating with honesty and integrity that we can all get behind, who isn't a celebrity brand.
Right. So what does good look like?
Yeah, I think good looks like a few different things. I think it's honesty, it's creativity, it's respect, emotional intelligence, but more importantly, it's clarity in what you're doing coupled with intentionality. And unfortunately, when you're in a competitive environment, you don't always have clarity and intentionality because desperate people do desperate things. And that's the hard part.
In the cannabis industry, I feel like the examples of what good looks like are so clouded by prohibition, by everybody playing, hey, I am, moving gear around, I'm doing this. There is a certain connotation that's associated with the industry, right? So I feel like that's one part of the equation where people really don't know what good is. There is the lack of professionalism. which, all these companies that are coming in, whether you call them big MSOs or you just call them people behind big companies. And that's the way that I personally look at them as well. It's the people behind the companies. They are acting completely out of value, right? And that creates the perfect dynamic to where it's like the Wild West, for lack of a better word. How long do you reckon it'll take to rectify that situation, or to at least start? And does it start as a collective, or does it start with the individual?
I think it starts with the individual being very comfortable and pushing back on what no longer serves them, meaning they don't feel good about it, right? Because I think instinctively we all have a sense of what is good and what is bad, right? Whether you want to call it cringe or sus or name whatever other term that me as a millennial is no longer hip to, right? You get a feeling that it's problematic in many respects, right? I think everyone in industry doesn't feel great about where the pricing is. But who are going to be the people that start to politely push back and say, yes, consumers are shopping on price point, but they're also shopping with customer service top of mind. They're also shopping with brands that they feel good about because they're sun-grown in mind, right? And it takes one individual to kind of raise the flag to say, this is problematic. And for others then to hear, see them, and then check and adjust what they're doing to see if it's problematic for them as well. Because again, it goes to my comment of clarity and intentionality. I think so many folks are running at 1,000 miles per hour that they're not slowing down to say, is what I'm doing actually making sense for my business model now and later? Right? So when I see pre-rolls being sold for under $5 for a full 1 gram, does that make sense for our industry, not just now, but also later? And what is that doing for the consumer, right? If it's things that are about to expire, well, that's problematic because now we're setting the expectation that buying cannabis out of the dispensary is not always going to be a product that you can take pride in. So then that opens the door for the legacy market to say, hey, you've never had a problem with me and I deliver. I'll get you a Christmas gift too if you really need one.
Yeah.
And so it becomes a slow movement, but we all have to find our voice in that and get comfortable in having those conversations to say, I'm feeling like this is going to have unintended consequences later down the line. Do you see any as well, or am I missing something? And that goes back to something that we started the conversation with, which is community. And I do feel that not only is the lack of professionalism hindering us, but also the lack of community. Because you can be as professional as you want to be, but are you in a community where others see that and want to emulate that? Are you in a community where you're able to share what's working and what's not and have conversation? And so for us to look at progressing forward over the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, it's really identifying who am I? And who do I want to be in the community that we all need to create together if we want to avoid some of the pitfalls we've seen in more mature markets like Colorado and California. And that's harder because it's not dollars and cents in an Excel sheet, right? It's a conversation about values, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not that we disagree with selling cannabis. We disagree with the way in which it's being sold. And so how do you have that nuanced conversation?
So how do you see the relationship between community and cannabis involving? I mean, you built Six Bricks with cultural awareness at the center. How do you see the role that your dispensary plays in creating the community that you're talking about, which is the missing piece? And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's more, you're hoping that community is a deeper hub for communication and not just a transaction, right?
Correct. So when we talk about community, it's showing up for people, right? Because that's step one. When I think about my entire journey, it was showing up to places I probably shouldn't have been, but I didn't have the awareness I shouldn't have been there, right? And so we show up in community, and it's not just at our geographic location of 1860 Main Street, right? We show up at the reader raids events in the community. We show up at the fundraisers, at the jazz festivals. We are present in ways that showcase we are a part of the community. And it's not just in names and dollars and cents, but it's physically being present in a way that prioritizes what the community is stating is important to them, and you supporting that in ways they're comfortable with, right? As I think about us as an industry, it starts with conversations that you and I are having, right? And then how do we have other people participate in this conversation? And ultimately, it's looking at trade associations and many other things that can be used as a catalyst to bring us together and help us to realign on what's important. I don't think many people would disagree that being able to sell 2 ounces over 1 ounce might be better, but how do we all get behind it in a way that invokes change, right? It requires us all to actually align to that. So that's where the professionalism comes in, followed by the community quickly thereafter, that then allows us to be the change agents to help shape an industry. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're doing, right? Right, wrong, or indifferent. We're shaping an industry where either Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, Apple TV, right? Someone's documenting how this all materialized. And what side of history do you want to be on? And it's funny, I had that conversation with my accountants who, you start to realize there are certain things that financial institutions still aren't comfortable with. And you're like, oh, they're going to be on the wrong side of history. Well, think about that in your own context. What side of history are you going to be on? Were you a part of the problem? Did you vent every time you got on a Zoom call? Or are you part of the solution in creating a better industry, not only for yourself, but for those around you as well?
When you say vent and community, it reminds me of right now a lot of rhetoric in specifically Massachusetts. It's you're right, people do vent. It is not a conversation that is looking towards the future and focusing on the solutions, focusing on the present and planning for the future. They're completely looking back. I have always found that when people are not, like, they're still focusing on the past because they have not come to terms, like they're playing victim in some way, shape, or form. Like, this happened, like it's unfair. The CCC, this is not fair. The town is, so many problems, so many hurdles, like competition. I feel like, what do you think that does to a business if the leadership, right, has that mentality of, hey, this is the situation that I am in is outside of my control, right? If that is the top-down directive, what do you think happens to an organization? Not even a dispensary, but just overall business structure.
I think it exists, but that is it. It's not competing, it's not evolving, it's not getting better. It's simply existing, right? And so, I mean, my team and I talk about this regularly. You could survive or you could thrive, right? And I think complaining and venting and constantly looking back keeps you stationary and in the survival mode of just thinking about what happened yesterday. And that's problematic because if you really want to thrive, you have to be able to think about not just what happened yesterday and today, but also tomorrow and the day after and the next 6 months and the next 12 months. And when you're in an organization where your leader is constantly thinking back to what happened last week or last month, it never allows the organization the creative freedom, the emotional maturity, and most importantly, the strategy of figuring out how they're going to compete tomorrow. And that is part of a larger problem, which is to say that you can either survive or thrive in this environment, right? And thrive not by the traditional context of you get a $20 million offer and get everything bought out and move to Hawaii. No, it's
That sounds
actually
great.
it
Anybody
sounds
offering that
phenomenal,
right now,
right?
Payton?
Like, anybody, call me, right? But it's thrive in the context that you have a staff that's highly motivated. You have clarity about directionally what you're trying to achieve on a reoccurring basis, and you're only focused on what's in your control, right? I mean, think about us in the course of our day as human beings. If we all walk through our day to day thinking about all the things not in our control, we wouldn't get anything done. I would
Right.
be scared to get in my car because I'd be thinking about if I get into a car accident, if I get a flat tire, so on and so forth, right? This idea of looking back can be paralyzing to your future. And it's very important that we start to think about that with a little bit more. Am I just as frustrated as everybody else with the Cannabis Control Commission or accounts payable and all these other factors? Yes. And please don't get me wrong. It is healthy to have the 5-minute vent session, just getting it out. But then, like, go for a run, hit a Pure Bar class, right? Like, figure out an outlet that allows you to show up and focus on getting the job done and what your people need to be set up for success to do that on a reoccurring basis, because that is the best spend of your time.
So make sure you're setting up your team for success on a reoccurring basis. How do you ensure standardization doesn't stifle the creativity and individuality within your team?
Checking in, having the honest conversation. Does this still serve us the way that we intended? But also being okay if it's not, and then evolving. I mean, my team and I have conversations constantly. I can acknowledge part of it is my undergrad degree and spending time with Jesuits, right? But we talked about the story very early on of monks that cut off the tails of cats for centuries.
Really?
And the conversation evolved one day to, why are we cutting off the tails of cats, right? One of the newly founded monks was curious and asking the question. And so one of the most senior monks turns to him and says, so that they don't get caught under the rocking chairs. So everybody looks around to then realize there's no rocking chairs, right? And so it's this idea you can get caught in the habit of doing something the way you've always done it. But if you don't allow for fresh thoughts and ideas to understand, does that still serve us in our current model? Then it's problematic. And I think it's important to pull in the lessons learned from your life and who you are and what you stand for to then set up a healthy framework for the team to then question with respect what we're doing and if it makes sense in terms of the context of where we are today, not where we were 3 months or 6 months ago. Because the answer might be no, and that's okay. But you have to allow for that evolution. And so my team is very clear. I look for feedback. We constantly talk about things that we did well and we didn't do well. But then we also have our monk conversation of, do we have any rocking chairs? And that creates a healthier dialogue.
Right. That is such a good story. I think I'm going to take that, Peyton. I'm going to definitely remix it, reuse it. Yeah, I have 3 cats, and so when I heard that, I was like, wait, why are we cutting off cats' tails? Like instinctively.
Yeah, it catches your attention, especially if you're a pet lover. Yeah,
for sure. No, I'm definitely gonna take that one with me. So, fresh perspectives. Okay. I think as a business owner, you have to have a pretty solid filter, right? So you have all these fresh perspectives, you have all these inputs, you have all these like feedback mechanisms from your team. I feel like at the same time, you have to have just a robust filter because you can't take every idea, right? You can't work on everything. How do you go about filtering, right, the feedback that you're getting while still focusing on your overarching goal?
Yeah. It's a great question because it's definitely not easy, but I can acknowledge I'm a very reflective person. And so I think it's giving yourself grace to acknowledge when you're in a position to have filtered well and when you need to take some time to think about it. And so for me growing up, my dad would always say, if it's a really good deal, you can sleep on it and wake up and I'll still be there. And if not, then it might not be the best deal. And so this idea that sometimes time is your best asset and really thinking through, is this the right decision and why? And sometimes you can't rush that. And it's hard in an environment where everything feels like you need to move at warp speed to get it done, or you're going to miss an opportunity, or the menu that was just sent to you, now all the SKUs are going to be gone, so on and so forth. But really taking the time to reflect and understand, why are we doing it? And going back to your goals, does it align to our strategy? Does it make sense? So for me, having a filter sometimes is saying, thank you so much for bringing that to my attention. I'm going to need to think on that one. Can we set up 15 minutes tomorrow and talk about it more? Or thank you for bringing that to my attention. I have quite a few questions to make sure I fully understand the context of it before I give my thoughts and ideas, because I want to make sure I'm being intentional in how I respond. I think creating that dynamic where your team sees you be human. I mean, I recall earlier this year, it was a day we were supposed to meet for maybe 60 minutes, and I had to be vulnerable with the team to say, I'm not in the right headspace to be fully present with you all. And I know what we're going to talk about is important, and you deserve my time and attention. So how about we push this out till tomorrow, so that way I can give you all of what you need, right? Because filtering for me is not only filtering to give a response, but it's filtering to say, like, where am I, right? If my headspace is thinking about something that is all consuming, but I'm supposed to be in a marketing meeting, am I showing up as my best self? And what does that do to the team that sees me disengaged and not fully present, in terms of they spent time and energy in creating something and are seeking my feedback, and I can't give it to them? So I think the filtering comes in many facets of giving yourself grace to understand, am I fully present, intentional, have all the facts to make a decision, or do I need to give myself time? And then ultimately thinking about ways you deliver that so it's encouraging. Yes, we could do that if it was legal. Unfortunately, it's not. And so we'll need
Right.
to think of another way, right? The team knows no but is my least favorite verbiage, because it implies a fixed mindset versus that of a growth, right? Yes, but, right? And thinking of different ways. That you can really kind of still create collaborative spaces for folks that create the dynamic where you're filtering yourself and creating creative moments, while also not putting your team in a less than ideal spot, if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. I had a college professor of mine who said he was talking to the class, and this was in relationship psychology, or focusing more on the relationship dynamics. But it's like, if you want to kill a relationship, use the word but, because it's like, if you say the word but, everything you said before the word but just automatically gets canceled. It's like
Oh yeah,
it's
it's gone.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean the verbiage really is no but, yes and, right?
yes,
Yes
right,
and applying that growth mindset of
right,
we're rocking. There's possibilities here.
yeah,
No but, fixed mindset, very few possibilities. And just the response in that alone, right? How do you motivate a team on a reoccurring basis? It's not easy, but you got to understand what's important to them, what's motivating them. And are you present to give that to them? And if not, take a step back.
right. So let's pivot here and talk about day one. Day one of 6 Bricks, doors just open, and today, what is the difference?
Oof. Less gray hair. No, just kidding. Difference.
Yeah,
Day one, there was a naive notion to many aspects of the day to day as it related to marketing and many other things. I mean, I'll be honest, we had an awesome grand opening. I joke with people, I had enough elected officials, like I could have held a delegation of some sort. I mean, the mayor was there, state senators, state representatives, and everyone just talking about what 6 Bricks meant to them. It was so powerful. And then the next day hits, and not everybody's showing up because there's no ribbon to be cut, and that's humbling in many respects. So I think it was learning to control my emotions relative to the nervousness of, will this actually work? Are people going to buy into it? How do I then continue to show up every day, even when things aren't working the way I think that they should? So day one, Payton, naive, eager, bright-eyed, bushy-tail. I would say present day, more cautiously optimistic, more thoughtful and intentional, especially with my time, because it truly is an asset. So thinking through, is this the best spend of my time and why? And I think if anything, I am more than ever comfortable with whatever the outcomes may be in a way that I wasn't when I first started. I mean, think about it. I was living my dream. I dreamed of Six Bricks. One day, I saw cannabis was going to be legal on the news and had this moment that said, oh, owning a dispensary would be awesome. And having my family support me in that would be even better. And that was a thought. And in present day, it is a physical space, a viable business that people come to and shop with on a reoccurring basis, right? That's powerful. But as a result of that, it also requires me to be comfortable and knowing that all good things come to an end and that at some point in time, Six Bricks may be no more. And if that is to happen, then it is more important than ever that every day that I have the opportunity to sit in the seat to show up as CEO, that I give it everything that I have within reason. So that way I have no regrets regardless of the outcome. So that's the difference between day one and day two. Day one, I was holding on for dear life. Present day, releasing the reins ever so slightly because I'm a better person for it.
Right. I am very similar. I find myself thinking about I don't know if you know the phrase, the Latin phrase "memento mori," "you too shall die," right? And it was Marcus Aurelius who always had, after every battle he's won, he had somebody hired to whisper in his ear, "You're going to die." So he would never, he would always have one foot on the ground, right? No matter how high you fly. It's an old Indian parable. It's like, asman na kitli waqt tu udis, but ek pag jamin ma ragje. That means no matter how high you fly in the sky, always keep one foot on the ground. But no, that's a pretty solid thing. And again, going back to leaders versus leaders, right? Not small business versus MSOs. How do you think this mentality helps you compete against other? I'm not even going to call it dispensaries. I'm just going to call them, again, human beings behind the actual construct of a business, right? How does your dispensary, right, prepare itself in order to compete against the market?
We stay humble, right? We understand that at the end of the day, customers have a choice. And every day that they choose Six Bricks, it is important that we put our best first foot forward, right? So from our first customer to our last customer, they should get the same service, right? And that becomes really important when you think about creating a culture that has a Six Brick standard versus a Payton standard or a Scott standard or a Taylor standard or a Kyle standard, right? It makes it more ever clear, everlasting in their mind, because regardless of if I'm here or not, that standard still applies. Right.
Right.
And so for us, it's being humble and understanding that the day customers stop choosing us, it's endgame, right? We're an independent retailer. And so we have to come to the table humble. And I do think that when you're in a larger entity, sometimes leaders lose the reality because we focus on price or we focus on tack. And it doesn't make up for the way that somebody feels when shopping with you. And
Right.
that feeling you really can't put a price on, because if somebody feels really good about it, they'll continue to show up each and every day. And I think that is a unique thought process to have, but one that many others should. When you start to really think about it more as a cannabis experience and less about a transaction. I mean, my favorite customers are the ones from day one who still remember me kind of being a jack of all trades, master of none, greeting them and then cleaning floors and doing everything to make sure that this all could work. But they keep showing up, and that's humbling because I know what the disposable income in the city of Springfield is, and they choose to spend their money here, and not taking that for granted has definitely served me well.
So what do you want people to feel, or what do you think people feel when they come to Six Bricks versus any other, business in this category in any other location in Massachusetts? What do you want people to feel, and what do you think people feel?
I think they feel in an authentic community, right? When I think about how the staff interacts with our customers, we're not trying to be name drop the large multi-state operator, right? We are cool with being Six Bricks. And we take pride in that. And so we're constantly thinking about ways in which we can delight our customers, from remembering their birthdays because they have a Dutchy profile with us, to then also thinking about what's happening in community and how can we respond to that. And it's outside of the performative nature of like it's Black History Month or Women History Month or let's do a canned food drive because Thanksgiving's coming, right? But it's really being authentic to say, we know basketball's important. We're the birthplace of basketball, baby. Like, let's go. Celtics all day. Like, let's think about that in terms of how then we respond to the promos and the campaigns and the many things that we do. And so I think our customers see that authenticity because they're not seeing it in others, right? Again, I go back to the copy and paste. You see one group doing it and they're seeing success, so then you copy paste and you do it in your location, but it's not authentic to who you are. And our authenticity continues to be top of mind as we think about ways in which we bring in new products and talk about them with our customers and our staff and allow our customers to think through if it's the right product for them, to then thinking about ways in which we honor the Celtics being NBA champs, right? And so it all becomes this interconnectivity of not trying to be anyone outside of who we are. And I think that's what our customers appreciate, right? They joke that there's no script at Six Bricks, and there's not. We don't try to get everyone to have a cookie cutter experience. We try to allow folks to engage with our customers in a way that feels both respectful and authentic to them, but then creates a dynamic where the customer is delighted by that experience.
So how do you make sure that the customers choose Six Bricks versus, any other dispensary in the marketplace? What do you think they feel that drives them to, the establishment that you set up?
Well, I think our name alone separates us, right? So the idea that Six Bricks is different by default of even our structure creates a dynamic, right? I think it's funny when people show up and they're like, what is Six Bricks anyway, right? It's like Six Bricks is the play on the Shubrick last name and so on and so forth. There's a story to it. And I think that creates some buy-in with people say, oh, okay, so there's not going to be one in Colorado or California. It's like, nope, you're at one of one. So there's a uniqueness in that alone. But then it's coupled with the reality that we're going to ask you some questions that go beyond indica sativa hybrid, right? How do you want to feel? What does that look like for you? I hope that our customers feel satisfied when they leave, content almost with the way in which they were able to procure their product and not make it just this transaction of, what are you looking for? Indica sativa hybrid, what form factor, right? And then, we're intentional with like our music choices and many other things that create more of an environment where I want people to feel like when they shop at Six Bricks, they're being treated as an extension of the family. And so it takes on a culture of almost being at the cookout. And so when my dad's in the greeters box and he's asking the questions of, is it your first time here? Well, welcome to Six Bricks. We're so glad you shopped with us, right? These little moments that trigger a memory where folks aren't going to remember the pre-roll they bought because inevitably they'll come back and ask us to check their profile. But they'll remember that warm feeling of, wow, that was a unique experience that I'm not going to get elsewhere. And that's hard to, put into words, nor do I think I would, because depending on who watches this, they might try and copy and paste as we talk about. But that's a piece of it.
Right. Well, Payton, I would say like, even if the competition were to watch it, like I could give them my playbook, but more to what you said, from the beginning of the conversation of like authenticity, nobody is going to execute it like me.
Absolutely.
And that's something that I like firmly believe in. Like, and same thing about your father. I think the one thing that I really appreciate about my upbringing and also your upbringing is you're very close to your family, very close, right? And I think that's one thing that America had a long ago, which is the family, right, being intertwined and helping in whatever shape or form. And I still see that here and there. I mean, my parents, they bought their first house 2 years ago in America, um, and the person that was selling the house was moving back to help his son basically start a business, right? And it's still there. You're a great example of that. But I feel like we've lost that. Or America in general has lost like knowing like that's important. Like it's okay if I have my father or my brother helping me and working at the front, right? In order to, help my vision.
Yeah.
I think in corporate America that's seen as like another like perspective, but I really think that that is a, almost a advantage because it's somebody who is like family is going to back you no matter what, right? In the best case scenario, they're
Oh,
going
in
to
the best case scenario, yeah. I
no
mean,
matter
it does
what.
make for an awkward Christmas when you're like, you just reprimanded me 3 days ago because I didn't meet the 6 brick standard, and now we're just casually exchanging Christmas gifts and
Right.
smiling so mom's not upset because we can't talk about work.
Can't talk
Uh,
about
but I think what you highlighting is the reality that we have fallen into a convenient trap coupled with a pandemic and social media and many other things that have created a dynamic where we don't have morals and values conversations. So
Mm,
instead of it being the conversation around what is important to you that's driving that behavior, we hyper focus on what's in front of us and what's the most convenient, right? And so it's having very real conversations to say, I make my bed every day because I take pride in being disciplined and having a fresh made bed when I get home, right? My counterpart who doesn't take pride in that isn't any less of a person as a result of it, but doesn't value it in the same way, right? Just in the same capacity that I will never apologize to someone via text. I will always do it in person. And yet we fall into the convenience trap of thinking sending an apology via text is appropriate because we don't value the lessons learned of looking somebody in the eye, acknowledging the pain, the hurt, our wrongdoing, and then progressing forward. So I think that as a whole, our society has to give thought to what are the morals and values we once held near and dear that fueled us in a meaningful way and probably also had unintended consequences, like let's not get it wrong. I was having this conversation, funny enough, this morning at Pure Bar, right? Relative to like this idea you can talk about mental health out in the open, I think is a beautiful thing, but it also is burdened with the responsibility of now that we know better, we can do better. And so we can't then have someone show up to work and then leave early multiple days in a row and blame it on mental health without then proactively looking to solve for that, right? And so again, the morals and values become important over time in terms of how it's progressing us. What are we holding important? How are we then operating with that importance top of mind? And unfortunately, because of recent events, even look at our election, right? Don't talk politics, right? Our morals and values are constantly in question, and yet it's not every day that somebody can sit down and actually tell you what theirs are. And I
right.
think that goes back to our early conversation about being very clear. I know my morals and values. I know what drives me. I know what doesn't. You will never get me out of bed if you say, hey, Peyton, I'm going to publicly recognize you. Okay, cool. Going back to sleep, right? That's not what's going to drive me. But if I have the opportunity to bring the community together and do good, I'm there every day of the week.
I was having and I'm pretty sure you're also very similar with this, where you have like very multi-layered conversations that are very, deep. And the question I was having with one of my friends who's a lawyer is, I wonder from like America and democracy is a very beautiful idea, right? And cannabis, right after, like the legalization of cannabis was a very beautiful idea. But I wonder on the road to freedom and liberation, let's say using America's example, what compromises must have been made on the morals and values, and how much of those compromises have gotten systemic and systematized into our institutions that we currently know as, and that is the status quo, almost like the cat situation, right? The cat and the tail.
Yeah.
And just how when America and the beautiful idea that it was, and then the reality of what it is now.
Yeah.
How does, like, I feel like cannabis industry is also like very similar to where the idea was very beautiful, but then there's all these compromises in morals and values, whether it's from, let's say price compaction. So you mentioned something about testing, and the outdoor farmers now saying, well, we can't pass testing, it's parts per billion. What are you doing for us? Like, we need to, recoup our money, and so it's what compromises have been made in the cannabis industry thus far, and where do you see the cannabis industry in the next 5 years?
I think there's a lot of compromises that have been made just based on how we were structured to start, right? I think the reality of the situation, when you look at, the ways in which we are or are not allowed to market, that showcases a lot of compromises. When you think about the communities that opted in or out, that's a lot of compromises, right? So I think from the beginning, it was understanding that we were not embraced, but we were tolerated. And so as a result of that, a lot of what we're seeing is reflective of that in many respects. I think what people forget about our founding fathers was the idea that it was going to be a living constitution, that they knew that they were only a moment in time, and there were going to be things that we as a country experience that would require our evolution, but at its core, hopefully we could come back to these things. And I think progressing forward, what we've seen is without that clarity of leadership that embraces a model that could fit for most, because we can't say all, because as a Black woman, I damn sure was not top of mind, right? We have now hit a point where, because we were more so tolerated than embraced, we have to go back and request the changes that embrace our industry in a more meaningful way, that allow us to have the conversation with the woman that has a glass of wine every single night and ask her what she likes most about that behavior, habit, whatever you want to call it, and then be able to educate her on the benefits that cannabis has. I mean, the idea that we can't even talk about the benefits publicly in a meaningful way that allows people to retire the notion of reefer madness and embrace this idea that cannabis can be used for what we see as the top 3 reasons in store: sleep, stress, and anxiety, right? The fact that that's a muffled conversation is problematic on many fronts. So I think we have to be the change we want to see in terms of pushing back on much of what was created out of tolerance and request that it be restructured for collaboration and evolution in a meaningful way.
I have a question from the individual that I interviewed before you, and
Okay.
it is a question for you.
Okay.
And the question is, if you could do this all over again, would you do it? And if you could, what would you change?
I would do it all again, and I wouldn't change anything, because I am a firm believer that everything happens for a reason. And while I might not love where the industry is right now, I do love the many people I have been able to encounter. I do love the many lessons learned. I do love the woman I've become in the process of it. And ultimately, I do love what Six Bricks has become to the community. Even though it's affectionately referred to as the bricks, it all showcases to me that the many morals and values that I hold near and dear still have relevancy in this world. And I wouldn't change any of that.
Okay. If you could speak to somebody who's at the very beginning of their journey into the cannabis industry, let's say it's not in mass because it's a little too late to play in the game in mass. What's one piece of advice that you would give them about perseverance, leadership, and success?
Be gentle pressure, relentlessly applied in all that you do. because a no is not a no. It just means not right now.
That is another one that I'm going to take with me, Peyton. That one was a really good one. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Peyton. I
Thanks
think
for
it's
having me.
definitely been a pleasure having you on. And where can people find out more information about you in Six Bricks?
Sixbricks.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Payton Shubrick that I know thus far on LinkedIn. So feel free to connect with me there as well. And thanks so much for the time. I appreciate it.
Of course. And one last thing. What is a question that you would like to ask one of our next guests? It can be anything.
I was just thinking, what is one quote you live by? I love a good quote. And now you got to circle back and let me know what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. What's a good quote that you live by, Peyton?
Ooh. Okay. Fear and faith can't coexist. So you have to choose one.
Fear and faith cannot coexist.
Because if you think about the energy spent fearing something, you could, in theory, leverage that same energy to have faith in something. So the two can't coexist, and you have to choose how you want to spend your time.
I think mine would have to be try is a word with no power.
I like that one.
Yeah.
I'll write that down.
Awesome, Peyton. Well, no, this was great. I felt like I learned so much. We should definitely have an episode 2 for sure. I mean, we didn't even get into, the construction, the licensing, all
Yeah,
the,
no.
like
I was literally thinking as I was sitting here, I was like, why don't we just do a dinner like once a month or something for mental stability, but then also just to learn from one another. So yeah, we got to get better on that.
Absolutely.